I think this is something that we all saw coming from a mile away. And I'm not talking about Disney's Wish flopping at the box office. Although if you are paying attention to the lead up of the release of this, that probably isn't surprising news for you. But what I'm talking about is what happens to a movie after it leaves theaters, because you got to understand Disney's Wish was supposed to be their big centennial animated movie. It was supposed to be a love letter to Disney animation and all things Disney. And it turns out it didn't resonate with audiences. So what's Disney left to do? Well, now they put it behind the paywall on their Disney Plus streaming platform, where the only way we can gauge the success or failure of it is through numbers that Disney themselves are reporting. And I'm not saying that they're just going to be outright lying about the viewership numbers of it, but they have all the incentive in the world to try to bolster it to make it look as good as possible. And I think that's where we're getting at with this story right here. Wish reached 13.2 million views in the first 5 days on Disney Plus, where it debuted on April 3rd after a November 2023 theatrical release. And the reason they use the first 5 days as opposed to just the debut time is because it's a streaming service. People can watch it at their leisure. So the first 5 days is pretty much the kind of the industry standard for streaming services to kind of gauge the interest in that particular show or movie. And it says here, this would make Wish the number 3 most viewed animated movie from Disney Animation Studios after it was premiering on the Disney Plus platform. And that's behind Encanto and Frozen 2. Now, keep in mind, this isn't for all animated movies that are premiering on the Disney Plus platform, like Pixar's Elemental that debuted at 26.4 million views in the first 5 days. And this is what leads me to think that Disney isn't just outright lying about the numbers, but I do have questions about how they actually go about getting their data. Because on the one hand, it does make sense that Wish would do about half as well as Elemental, because if you look at their respective box office takes, Elemental was able to bring in $485 million on a $200 million budget. So with that type of budget, they probably needed to make around $600 million in order to just break even. And they obviously fell short by quite a bit. But when you look at the box office results for Wish, you can see it's around $240 million. So roughly half of what Elemental got, but same budget. So this was even more of a failure for them. But because it was able to make around half of what Elemental got, it stands to reason that it would get half as many views when it premieres on Disney Plus platform. But the reason I don't necessarily trust the numbers that we're getting out of Disney Plus is because it's just contingent on them telling the truth. Because this is how they say they get their viewership numbers. They get the total number of minutes viewed for a particular movie or show, and then they divide it by the runtime of that movie or show, and that's where you get the viewership. So for this one, they say they got X number of minutes, divided it by, I think it's like 90 minutes for the runtime of Wish. And then they get 13.2 million views for it. And that seems all well and good, but it still is just contingent on them being truthful on the raw viewership numbers for the movie. And I have my doubts that's actually the case, because we have some other points of comparison when it comes to the viewership figures for some of their programming, because they don't necessarily report the numbers for everything, but some things we do get some comparative data. Like when Ahsoka first premiered on the Disney Plus platform, they said it had 14 million views worldwide in the first 5 days. It's like, well, okay, fine, 14 million views. They're doing the same methodology that they get for Wish, and that's the numbers that they come up with. But then when we get some other third parties like Samba TV, they reported 1.2 million views. And you're probably thinking, where's the discrepancy coming from on this? And a lot of that just has to do with the fact that Samba TV, for people who don't know how they actually go about it, there's certain people who basically register with Samba TV to kind of record their viewership, kind of like the old Nielsen ratings, but this time for online stuff or like streaming and things like that. It's not 100% accurate, but they basically get viewership data from the people that they have in their sample, and they have a pretty good sample size. And then they try to extrapolate that to get the actual figures. Now, mind you, it's not perfect, but the only perfect thing we would get is if we had full transparency on how Disney gets their numbers. And they don't give that to us. Only, well, actually, for the most part, no one actually provides that or anything like that, which arguably they probably should, because when they're making a lot of their money on advertisers, you would think that they would have to disclose how many people are actually watching their programming in order to be accurate to the advertisers. But apparently that's not the case, or maybe they keep some of the stuff kind of hush hush where it's a confidential, where they can't actually report like how much is actually being generated for those advertisers or for the company, because we don't have the actual viewership figures, but at least the viewership figures aren't public. But this is why I just have my doubts that what Disney is reporting for Wish is not necessarily the case, because I do find it kind of convenient that you can have a movie like Wish where it's like, okay, it was decent amongst audiences. Critics didn't really care for it. Look at all audiences, top critics, still not too great, but it's not terrible. So it's understandable to assume people just didn't want to pay for it in theaters. They're waiting for it to be on streaming services. And if that's the case, that's not a good sign for Disney, because it does cost a lot for a regular family of four to go out to theaters. When you're talking tickets, concessions, it's looking at over $100 for a family. So a lot of people would probably look at this and be like, I don't want to take the kids out to the theaters and spend that much money to go watch a movie. I would rather just wait a few months in order to watch it on streaming service, which that's kind of the audience that Disney has been kind of cultivating over the last several years. They've basically been training their audiences to just wait and watch it on streaming as opposed to seeing it at the box office. And that could be in large part to why their movies have been failing at the box office. But I think there's a little bit more to it than just that. I think that is definitely a factor here, but we're not seeing that with other movies and other streaming services or anything like that. Disney seems to have a particular problem with it. And I think that could also be in large part to the fact that a lot of families are just kind of turned away from all the messaging that Disney is trying to shoehorn into their properties. Famously, Bob Iger has said numerous times that they're going to try to quiet the noise when it comes to culture war stuff. But then he also recently said that he doesn't think audiences even know what woke is. And he says that Disney isn't trying to be political and things like that. That's kind of where this article is coming from. Disney CEO Bob Iger emphasizes that the company would focus on entertaining over advancing any kind of agenda. So that seems pretty cut and dry right there until you actually dive a little bit further. I've always believed that we have a responsibility to do good in the world, but we know our job is not to advance any kind of agenda. He said on a live stream meeting, for as long as I'm in the job, I'm going to continue to be guided by a sense of decency and respect, and will always trust our instincts. And that's kind of talking out of both sides of your mouth right there. And I'm getting back to Wish with this. Just bear with me for a second here, because imagine you get like a deeply religious person. They're saying, I'm not going to try to preach with people in the movies I'm producing, but I'm going to make the values of the movie reflect my current values. Well, then in a way you're kind of doing that. And I think that's what Bob Iger is doing with this, with a lot of their political messaging and things like that. He says, we're not trying to shoehorn that in there, but those are values that this company stands by. And we are going to make movies that reflect our values. And that's turning away a lot of audiences. And that's kind of where I'm getting back with Witch, because I think there are parents out there who aren't inclined to subject their kids to these sort of things. And that's why they're kind of taking a wait and see approach. They're not going to watch these movies in theaters. They're waiting for it to come out on a streaming service. And then the parents watch it first to see if it think it's appropriate for their kids. And if they think it's fine for their kids, well, then they'll let their kids watch it. And I think that's where we're getting a lot of these viewership figures from, because it shows it's not doing well in theaters, but it's doing exceptionally well on streaming services. And I think that's because you're watching it a couple times in one household. And it also explains why people just aren't inclined to actually take their kids out to see these in movie theaters. But let me know what you think about all this in the comment section below. Do you think that they're actually doing as well as what they claim they're doing? Or do you think it's more along the lines of what I'm saying, where Disney has kind of cultivated an audience that doesn't watch things in theaters and probably brought up parents to want to pre-screen things for their kids in order to allow them to watch it? Because I'm curious what other people have to say. That's what I think about this, but I could be wrong. But let me know what you think about all this. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you click that subscribe button if you want to stay up to date with the latest in entertainment news. And if you don't mind, why don't you click that like button and share the video out there to your friends, because it really helps out with the channel. Thank you.